It's lunchtime on a fairly rainy day, and something's been bugging me about this car and the rear shock absorbers. I've kind of been looking at it and looking at various pictures and things, and I think the issue is I've actually got the fronts and the rears muddled up. So you can see there I've got two different sorts of shocks. And what I had originally was these ones on the right, on the front of the car, and then the ones with the short arms on the back. But it turns out that that's wrong. And you can see I've swapped one of them over now. This is how I had it before. And this has been sitting here like this for months now. I put these on ages and ages ago, I think before I even moved here. And nobody's noticed. So one of the reasons I make these films isn't to show people how to do things. It's so that people can point out to me the things I'm doing wrong or could do differently. But these longer arm shocks, I'm pretty sure need to go on the back. Because if we look at this one, it's all just done up finger tight. This is the one with the short arms, and I think this puts the shock absorber rotation point in a much better place because it is sort of halfway between the spring and the axle. So I think these need to go on the front. That seems to make a lot more sense, which means at the back here, if we grab one of these need to go in line with the rear axle about there. So this kind of shows more now how the mounting needs to go. I have got a picture of an original one that has them mounted here. There are two ways these are mounted, either here parallel to the rear axle or sort of down here, if we can see, parallel to the rear springs. And I don't know which way is better, but definitely original Brooklyns came both ways. I just went for this way because that matches the car that I'm copying, and I've got the most reference photos of that, but I don't have the details of exactly how those brackets work because you can't really see them. I prefer that inboard mounting method because it just seems cleaner. Once the body's in place, you won't see the rear shocks rather than having them on the outside of the car. They'll be sort of tucked away on the inside. I think it'll just make for much cleaner lines on the car. So I still need to figure out where these go. I'm going to swap over the other front one, so at least I'm playing with the right shock absorbers. And then I will have to figure out later on exactly where those brackets need to go. Out in the shed tonight, I've been playing a bit more with these 3D printed Rotax front panels, and I have discovered you can polish them up quite well. I start with wet and dry sandpaper, sanding them wet, and start at around 400 grit, and then work up 600, 800, finish up on 1200. And then I've been finishing up with the Meguiar's car polishers. So this one's halfway aggressive, this one's fairly fine. So that's good for getting a real shine on things. And that actually works really well for taking scratches out of welding helmet faceplates and safety goggles and things like that. Give it a bit of a polish with this stuff from time to time, and it keeps them nice and clean. But I've discovered that I've never come across any solvent that will actually affect PLA plastic before until I accidentally sprayed it with this carb cleaner. And there's something in this which actually affects the plastic. So this one's kind of horrible and melted. This is the one I was working on, and it got a little bit of overspray, and there's little pin marks in it now. It's kind of damaged. But that's okay because I'm still experimenting. One of the things I've done is that this one was 2mm thick, and I've printed a new one which is actually thicker. That's 3mm, just to make it a bit more rigid, less bendy, and a bit more solid. The problem with this one is when I printed it, I need to increase the shell sizes, the top and bottom thickness basically, because otherwise what happens is it doesn't do a full solid print. You get what's called infill, where it prints a crosshatch pattern basically. And on this one, even though you can't see it on camera, you can actually see that coming through on the panel. So I need to reprint this with very dense printing, so it's effectively solid plastic. These screws aren't quite the correct screws, I think. I think the original ones are slightly domed on the top. These were some brass screws that I had, and I just zinc plated them, so they don't look too bad. They look the part. And this isn't the correct sort of switch, obviously. This is a modern multi-position switch, but something like that will work. One of the problems with the modern switches is the angle of rotation for each position, which doesn't quite match the panel. So I believe this is a 30° per position switch, which is quite typical, but it's going to be close enough. I mean, you can see kind of what it's pointing at. Obviously, it'll need a different sort of knob on it as well. And I did order it's an early mini floor starter switch, I believe. And the reason I got that isn't to directly drive the starter. As other people have pointed out, if the only starter switch you've got is in the panel, that means you have to run thick cables all the way up to it and then back down. That's just a bit of a pain, and it can be a little bit unsafe. So it makes more sense to use a starter solenoid. So I'm going to try and get a period correct one, something suitable, ideally something that you can get new ones off, so I know it'll be reliable. And then you just need a much smaller switch here just to turn on the solenoid. But the mini starter switch is good because it's got a threaded shaft on it, which means I can make a knob that can screw onto here, onto the switch, and it should be a nice solid push type switch. For the fuse, I'm just going to do a dummy fuse because in the actual car, I'm going to have the starter solenoid. I'm going to have relays to drive most of the functions up here, and I'll have remote mounted fuses as well. I'll just hide those somewhere or disguise them. So this just needs to be a dummy, so I'm just going to print up a dummy looking fuse for that. What else have we done? So I'll take this over here. This isn't a Riley part, but another new addition, something I've been talking about for a little while, is I finally invested in a decent ultrasonic cleaner. And this is the first thing I put through it. So this is actually, if it'll focus, a Ford Escort oil pump, of all things, which I've had for years. This is for another project. It's not really car related, but it does use a lot of car related parts. It's kind of me revisiting a project I did 20 years or so ago, and I've always wanted to go back to it. And I've been buying a few little bits and pieces lately that hopefully I can do that. It's just another distraction from the car, really. But the ultrasonic cleaner, I went for a 6.5 litre one. The idea being I wanted something big enough that I can put effectively SU carburetor parts in it. I've actually got a set of 4 AML carbs that could go on the Riley, and I want to rebuild those even if I don't use them. I think they're actually worth quite a bit of money, those. So things like that can all go in here and be cleaned nicely. The reason I went for this size was 1, to fit the parts, 2, because the bigger ones tend to have a drain tap on the side like this one does. So it makes emptying it a lot easier. So I can just empty that down into a bucket. And I also went for the type that has really simple controls. So the more modern ones have electronic controls with buttons, and you get those membrane touchpads, and I just don't like those. The user interface is horrible. They're more likely to fail over time, so I went for something nice and simple. It's got a simple temperature control, which that'll just be some sort of potentiometer or a some sort of big variable resistor in there. And this is actually a mechanical timer. So you turn that and it slowly ticks down until it turns off. Very, very straightforward, very simple to use. You don't have to look up a manual. Anyone can figure out what this does and how it works. So, like I say, I've tested it on this little oil pump. It worked really well. So I'm hoping that'll work really nicely for other car parts. What else? So the other thing I've been looking at is the shock absorbers, of course, for the Riley. So I've swapped them round. I did have them the wrong way round, I think. I've been looking at all sorts of photos, checking all my reference material. It's very difficult to see the details, but this looks more correct. So I believe this is where the front ones go, the ones with the uneven arms. It seems to put the shock itself in the right sort of place. So that means at the rear, I've got these shocks with the longer but equal length arms. When I first bought these, I had to decide if I was going to go shocks in line with the axle or in line with the body. And I thought I'd gone in line with the axle, but I think looking at it now, I've gone the other way, and I'm going to mount them outside the body, which is fine. Both seem to be equally correct, and both are about as difficult to do as each other. So if they were mounting this way, they would effectively go there. So if we look up here, so these are very bad printouts. My printer's getting a bit wonky. Pictures off an original one, and this is the one I'm actually more or less copying off for my car. And it's a bit hard to see, but you can see the mounting points here, and here's the shock. So these are obviously longer and have a unequal length arm. So if I was doing this setup, I would have shocks like that. But what I actually have here are these ones. And you can see this wouldn't work. So they would have to kind of go in like that somehow. And they just don't really fit very well that way. So instead, I'm going to go for what I believe is the more common setup, which is there's a U-shaped steel bracket. It's probably, I don't know how thick it would be, probably 8 mil, 10 mil, sort of a horseshoe shape that bolts onto these two mounting points here on the trunnion. And then there's a pin that comes through, just bolted through. And I believe I've got those pins. And that'll be the mount for one arm of the shock absorber. And then the lower arm down there will get mounted to the chassis. And all I have to do there is basically make up effectively a smaller version of them. And given I've already done that once, I should be able to do that again to do the shock mounts. I think for mine, I will make it pretty much exactly how I did those front ones, where it is a pin that goes all the way through with a nice big thread on it. So it's actually bolted to the chassis, and then two tapered spacer plates that just take up the angle. That'll give a very, very strong attachment. I have seen, I've got somewhere, some other shock mounts, original Riley shock mounts, and they'll work fine. Although I will probably need to get new decent sized nuts for those, but that shouldn't be too bad to do. So I think that's what I'm going to do with these. That should be correct. It looks correct, and I think those are the right parts to do that. I'm still waiting for a few bits and pieces for this. The remote gear shifter should still be on the way. The sender of that rang Parcel Force to find out what's happening with it, and he was told that it was actually in New Zealand already, but the tracking still says it's in the UK, so we don't know where it is really. Hopefully it'll turn up at some point. I've got all the brake parts coming soon. Obviously all the shipping just seems to be taking a lot longer at the moment, of course, but I've also been measuring up the body because I've been doing my 3D CAD modeling. I'm still learning exactly how to do it all for organic shapes like the car. The basics I know because, of course, I've done my Enigma machine and I'm always doing 3D modeling off little bits and pieces I want to 3D print. But doing a more organic shape like a car body is going to be a little bit interesting, so I'm still sort of learning that. I'm piecing that together bit by bit. But I've been taking measurements off the chassis, and I've actually got two sets of, I wouldn't exactly call them blueprints, they're more like my plan drawings, like 3-angle drawings, or 3-view drawings rather. One set was done off the original Brooklyns that I'm copying, and it was actually for a doorless body, so I don't know if they were planning to build one or what the story was there, but I've got a copy of those, and that's based on this chassis, or at least the chassis that this was copied off, so that's accurate. They were done by an architect, so I'm pretty sure he knew what he was doing when he was drawing it up. And there's another set of blueprints where if you search online for Riley Brooklyn's blueprints, you'll find these all over the place. And I believe they originally came from a toy maker or a model maker. It seems to be the original set. And I found a copy of those, a photocopy, very mangled, very spotty photocopy in a lot of the documentation that Joss had given me with the car. So I scanned that in. And by overlaying both those sets of blueprints in my CAD software, I can see that they're both fairly close. They're not 100% identical, but they're very, very similar. And it's good enough for me to get a good idea of what the body should look like and all the basic dimensions. So I have set the steering wheel is now at the correct angle and height. And I'm slowly building up the model. And I'm going to see if I can use that to figure out the body shape. And then from that, figure out the framing I'm going to need. And again, I've been collecting so many photos and pictures, little bits and pieces from all over the place. So I've got a fair idea of what it is I need to make and how to make it. I'm not sure any two of these cars were identical from the factory even. There's so many different variations, changes, and of course they're 90 or more years old now, so they've all been messed around with. So I can get something that's pretty close. The other thing is the Austin 7. So if I can center it. I'm still waiting to find out if I can even register this. I rang them again today. I was on hold for about 45 minutes. And all they could really tell me was, yes, it's still being processed. Somebody did look at it 2 weeks ago, apparently, which would have been the last time I rang. So I don't know if that means nobody had looked at it until then and they suddenly decided they needed to look at it, or exactly what's happening there. So I'm just still waiting to hear. It's taken so long now. There's no chance I'd be able to get this inspected this year. I'm sure. It's the testing stations are all really backed up. One of the reasons is because of the lockdowns, they gave everyone extra time for getting warrant of fitnesses on cars. So normally for older cars, you have to get a warrant of fitness, which is the same as the old British MOT, more or less, every 6 months, which is a real pain in the neck, especially for cars like my little MG, which I'm not even using every day. But because they extended that time for people, because people were in lockdown, they couldn't take their cars. The time limit, I think, is expiring soon. So there's going to be thousands and thousands of warrants due, and people trying to get them all at the same time. So I'm pretty sure the testing station is going to be busy well into next year now. So even when I do get permission to get this inspected, that's going to take a while, which is just annoying. But there's not much you can really do about that. So in the meantime, I guess just keep plodding away on the Riley. When the parts from the UK arrive, which shouldn't take too long, they're normally pretty quick. Hopefully I can get the rest of the brakes sorted out. I've just realised I need to paint up the brake cross shafts. And rear shocks, which shouldn't be too hard. I need to check and see what high tensile steel I've got to see if I've got enough to make up the pins or if I need to get more. And that'll be another CAD modelling job to make the little U-shaped bracket that goes over there. They can just be fairly thick mild steel, and I should be able to get those plasma cut at the engineering place that's in the little town just up the road, hopefully. So that's pretty much where I'm at today. I should add that one thing that's helping with the 3D modeling and the trying to draw up the body plans is the fact that I have this original door skin, because I know the dimensions of this and I can match that up to the plan and figure out the body shape, a lot of the body shape, just from this one panel. Now that's one of the reasons I haven't tried to repair it or fix it or anything like that, because you don't want to lose the shape of it.